Harriet Tubman, the fearless conductor of the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Ross, is one of the most iconic figures in American history. Revered as a symbol of courage and resistance, Tubman became known as Moses to many, a nickname given by the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison for her tireless work leading enslaved people to freedom through the Underground Railroad. Her life has inspired books, movies, songs, and generations of activists fighting for justice and equality. While aspects of her life have taken on the aura of myth, the truth is no less remarkable. Born into slavery in Bucktown, Maryland, Tubman escaped bondage in 1849 and didn't stop there. Instead of settling into her own freedom, she risked her life repeatedly to return to the South and rescue others, eventually helping at least 70 individuals find freedom. She did so through cunning, deep faith, and unmatched determination. She traveled under cover of night, using songs as secret codes, bribing informants and donning disguises to outwit slave catchers. But Harriet Tubman's heroism didn't end with the Underground Railroad. She also served as a nurse, scout, and spy for the Union Army during the Civil War, and later advocated for women's suffrage. Her story is one of action, sacrifice, and relentless pursuit of justice, making her not just a hero of her time, but for all time. In this blog, we'll explore the incredible life and lasting legacy of Harriet Tubman, separating the folklore from the facts while honoring the powerful truth at its core. Absolutely. Here's a 400-word section for the blog titled Early Life and Enslavement. Expanding on the key points you mentioned. Darts in an early life and enslavement. Harriet Tubman was born as Araminta Ross, known to her family as Minty, around 1822, in Bucktown, Maryland. She was one of 9 children born to Harriet, Richard Green, and Ben Ross, both enslaved. Her exact birth date is unknown, a common reality for enslaved people whose lives were rarely recorded in detail by slaveholders. From her first breaths, Tubman's world was defined by brutality, forced labor, and the systematic dehumanization that slavery imposed. She grew up on the Fa Brodus plantation, where families could be torn apart without warning. Tubman witnessed the sale and separation of 3 of her sisters, events that deeply scarred her and helped form the resolve that would later define her resistance to the system. From an early age, she was rented out to other households and forced to perform hard labor. One of her earliest memories was being whipped for taking a sugar cube without permission. Perhaps the most pivotal moment of her early life occurred when she was still a teenager. While trying to protect another enslaved man who was attempting to flee, Minty was struck in the head by a heavy weight, a 2-pound metal weight thrown by an overseer. The injury was severe. She suffered a traumatic brain injury that resulted in debilitating headaches, seizures, and episodes of narcolepsy for the rest of her life. Yet, she would later interpret these episodes as visions from God, a belief that deeply influenced her sense of purpose and destiny. It was during this time that her Christian faith became a guiding force. Despite being denied formal education, Tubman learned biblical stories from her mother, especially those about deliverance and freedom. The story of Moses leading his people out of Egypt resonated deeply with her, and would later serve as both her inspiration and her alias. Even amid suffering, Tubman exhibited a fierce sense of independence and defiance. She refused to be broken by her circumstances, developing a quiet strength and an unshakable belief in justice. These qualities, formed in the crucible of enslavement, would lay the foundation for her transformation into one of the most daring and successful conductors of the Underground Railroad. Here is the Escape to Freedom section, approximately 350 words, based on your points, that are when Escape to Freedom. In 1844, Araminta Ross took a major step toward personal autonomy by marrying John Tubman, a free black man. Though marriage between a free man and an enslaved woman was legal, it offered no guarantee of security. Harriet remained enslaved, and any children the couple might have had would have inherited her status, not John's freedom. Around this time, she began calling herself Harriet, adopting her mother's name as a symbolic rebirth and a quiet act of resistance. Despite being married to a free man, Harriet's status as property meant her life was still subject to the whims of enslavers. In 1849, her enslaver, Edward Brodus, died. His death triggered uncertainty and fear for Harriet as the estate began evaluating its assets, including enslaved people, for potential sale. She feared being sold deeper into the South, where conditions were often even harsher and escape more difficult. Rather than wait for that fate, Harriet made the life-altering decision to escape. She left behind everything she knew, her husband, her family, her home, and began the perilous journey north to Philadelphia. She traveled mostly at night, navigating by the Beer North Star, avoiding slave catchers, and relying on a clandestine network known as the Underground Railroad. Along the way, she received aid from both black and white abolitionists, including members of the Quaker community, who risked their own safety to help people fleeing slavery. The journey to freedom was long, dangerous, and uncertain. Yet after weeks of walking, hiding, and surviving on sheer determination, Harriet Tubman crossed the border into Pennsylvania, a free state. Upon stepping onto free soil, she later recalled, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. I felt like I was in heaven." But Tubman didn't rest in her newfound freedom. Instead, she made a vow. She would return, again and again, to rescue her family and others still enslaved. This promise would define the rest of her life and establish her as the most iconic conductor of the Underground Railroad. Here is the expanded 600-word section on Harriet Tubman as the Underground Railroad Conductor, based on your outline. The Underground Railroad Conductor. Harriet Tubman did not see her own escape from slavery as the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. After gaining her freedom in 1849, she made a solemn vow to return for her family and help others still trapped in bondage. Over the next decade, Tubman would risk her life time and again, making an estimated 13 trips back into the slave-holding South. Through these missions, she personally rescued around 70 people, including her brothers, parents, and close friends, and helped hundreds more find their way to freedom. Tubman became a key figure in the Underground Railroad, a covert network of abolitionists, safe houses, and secret routes designed to help enslaved people escape to free states in Canada. She worked closely with both black and white allies, Quakers, free black communities, and anti-slavery activists, who provided shelter, food, and directions along the route. Traveling mostly at night, Tubman relied heavily on the North Star to guide her. She used her natural landmarks, such as rivers, swamps, and mountain ranges, to avoid roads patrolled by slave catchers. Safe houses, sometimes marked with discreet symbols like quilt patterns or lanterns in windows, offered shelter and brief respite before moving on. Each journey could take weeks, and the danger of betrayal or capture was ever present. Tubman's success as a conductor was due in large part to her remarkable resourcefulness and creativity. She frequently used disguises, sometimes posing as a man, an elderly woman, or even a mentally ill person to avoid suspicion. She also carried sleeping powders to quiet crying babies during dangerous moments, and sometimes bribed in informants or border guards when necessary. One of her most ingenious methods of communication involved spiritual songs. Tubman used music to signal when it was safe for those hiding to come out or to warn of danger. She often sang songs like "Go Down Moses" and "Bound for the Promised Land," altering the tempo or lyrics as secret messages. To those in hiding, her voice meant hope, safety, and the promise of freedom. Despite the enormous risk, Tubman never lost a passenger. She carried a pistol, not only for protection but also as a deterrent against turning back, knowing that wavering could jeopardize the entire group. "You'll be free or die," she is famously quoted as saying. Her reputation became so feared among Southern enslavers that they placed a $140,000 bounty on her head, a staggering sum at the time, though modern historians debate the exact figure. The threat was real. Tubman's efforts were not just acts of personal courage, but deliberate political resistance. At a time when the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it legal to capture escaped slaves even in free states, Tubman began guiding fugitives all the way to Canada, where U.S. laws could not reach them. She also worked closely with abolitionists like William Still and Thomas Garrett, coordinating rescues and organizing logistics for each mission. By the late 1850s, Tubman's name had become legendary, known as Moses. For leading her people out of bondage, she was praised by prominent abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass, who wrote, "I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than you have." Harriet Tubman was more than just a conductor. She was a one-woman liberation force, using stealth, intelligence, and sheer will to outmaneuver an entire system built to dehumanize her. Her legacy in the Underground Railroad remains one of the most courageous and successful resistance movements in American history. The Civil War years. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Harriet Tubman immediately saw it not only as a battle for the Union, but as a fight for the freedom of all enslaved people. True to her mission, she joined the Union effort, bringing her unique knowledge of Southern geography, survival tactics, and intelligence-gathering skills to the battlefield. Over the course of the war, Tubman served in multiple critical roles, as a padre, nurse, scout, and outsider for the Union Army. Initially, she worked as a nurse and cook at military camps in South Carolina, tending to both black and white soldiers, as well as newly freed people suffering from disease and malnutrition. Using herbal remedies learned during her childhood, she treated patients for ailments such as smallpox and dysentery, often with limited resources. But her most impactful contributions came in the realm of military intelligence. Tubman's familiarity with Southern terrain and her trusted relationships with local black communities made her an ideal candidate for espionage. She organized and led a network of scouts who mapped territory, located Confederate supply lines, and gathered strategic information, all while operating behind enemy lines. In 1863, she played a central role in one of the war's most dramatic and successful missions, the Combahee River Raid. Working alongside Union Colonel James Montgomery, Tubman became the first woman in U.S. history to lead a military operation. She guided Union gunboats through waters filled with Confederate torpedoes and led troops in a surprise attack on several plantations along the South Carolina riverbanks. The raid resulted in the liberation of more than 700 enslaved people, many of whom later joined the Union Army. Despite the magnitude of her contributions, Tubman's wartime efforts were largely overlooked by history for many years. She received little official recognition or compensation during her lifetime, and it took decades for the U.S. government to grant her a military pension. Yet her wartime service cemented her legacy not just as a freedom fighter, but as a strategic thinker, military leader, and unwavering symbol of black resistance. Here is the modern 300-word section. On to Harriet Tubman's life after the Civil War. Life after the war. After the Civil War, Harriet Tubman returned to Auburn, New York, where she had settled before the war. Though she had played a crucial role as a Union spy, scout, and military leader, Tubman received no formal military salary and struggled for decades to secure even a basic pension for her service. Financial hardship, compounded by lifelong health issues stemming from her head injury, made her post-war years physically and economically challenging. Despite these difficulties, Tubman remained deeply committed to justice and activism. She turned her attention to the growing movements for civil rights and women's suffrage. She worked alongside prominent figures like Susan B. Anthony and Emily Howland, speaking at suffrage conventions and using her life story as a powerful argument for equality. Tubman believed that the struggle for black freedom and women's rights were intertwined, and she often reminded audiences that both battles were part of a larger fight for human dignity. One of her most lasting contributions during this period was the establishment of the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged. In 1896, with the support of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, she purchased land in Auburn and opened the home to care for elderly and indigent African Americans. Though she struggled to fund it, Tubman remained involved in its operation until her health declined. In her later years, Tubman finally began to receive some public recognition. She was honored at veterans gatherings and by various civic organizations. In 1899, she was granted a pension, not for her work as a spy, but as the widow of a Union soldier from her second marriage. Harriet Tubman died in February 1913, surrounded by friends and family, and was buried with military honors. Though the world was slow to fully appreciate her, her legacy only grew after her death, and continues to inspire generations. Here is the Brewan 250-word section on Harriet Tubman's legacy and cultural impact. Miro. Legacy and cultural impact. Harriet Tubman's legacy has only grown in the years since her death. Once overlooked by official history, she is now celebrated as one of the most courageous and influential figures in American history. Her story has become a powerful symbol of resistance, perseverance, and justice, inspiring generations to fight against oppression in all its forms. Tubman's life is now widely taught in schools, featured in children's books, biographies, and academic scholarship, ensuring that her courage continues to educate and inspire. She has been portrayed in numerous films and documentaries, most notably the 2019 feature film Harriet, which brought her remarkable story to a new global audience and earned critical acclaim. Her cultural significance extends to public commemorations. Tubman has been honored on U.S. postage stamps, monuments, and historic landmarks across the country. The Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad, National Historical Park in Maryland, and the Harriet Tubman Home in Auburn, New York, serve as living memorials to her legacy. One of the most symbolic efforts to honor her came in the form of a proposal to place her image on the U.S. $20 bill, replacing Andrew Jackson. While the initiative has faced delays, the very proposal reflects the nation's growing recognition of Tubman's enduring importance. Beyond physical tributes, Tubman's spirit lives on in activism, civil rights movements, and calls for justice. She reminds us that one person, armed with conviction and courage, can challenge even the most entrenched systems of injustice and win. Conclusion. Harriet Tubman's life stands as a testament to the transformative power of courage, faith, and unrelenting pursuit of justice. Born into slavery, denied education, and physically scarred for life, she could have remained in the shadows of history. Instead, she chose to fight, not just for her own freedom, but for the liberation of others. Her bravery was not momentary, it was sustained, strategic, and rooted in a profound belief that all people deserve to live free. Tubman's story is not simply one of escape, it is one of return. Time and again, she risked everything to go back for those still in chains. Her life reminds us that heroism often comes not from strength or status, but from deep moral conviction and an unshakable sense of duty. In today's world, Harriet Tubman remains deeply relevant. Her legacy lives on in movements for racial justice, women's rights, and grassroots activism. She teaches us that systemic change requires persistence, courage, and a willingness to act when others stay silent. Harriet Tubman was more than a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She was a conductor of change, a guide for justice, and a symbol of what one determined soul can accomplish against overwhelming odds.